Okay, hello, welcome to Web Development Lesson 11. Today we'll be talking about forms and how they interact with some of the backend stuff we've been talking about back in Lesson 10. We'll also be going a bit more into HTML. Okay, so HTML forms they're kind of a special element that provide a pre-made way for the user to submit information to a web server. So they actually came before JavaScript and were the primary uh, method of input where like the user would be able to like type something up, send it to a server, and then the server would use some language, probably PHP or like another web server in order to process that information, validate it, do something with it, and then send back a response. And then the browser can take that response and show it to the user. So they're often used still to make search bars, contact information submissions, payment detail inputs, login pages, and feedback pages. Because of how easy they are to basically just code in HTML, you don't have to worry about any JavaScript. So some pros of HTML forms are that they're very easily configurable and there are many possible configurations. So for example, if you see a Google form, like, for example, if your teacher uses it for some tests or you're filling out a survey in Google Forms, for example, for the email option, if you type in something other than an email, then it's going to say something like, okay, this is not a valid email. Please type in a valid email. And Google Forms actually does that using JavaScript, and it's a bit complicated because they will actively detect when you change the input and then tell you if something is wrong with your input. With HTML forms, there's a bunch of pre-built options so that if you try and type in, like, for example, your name in the email box, it will tell you, oh, this is not a valid email. I can't send that out. And also for Google Forms, there's also that required option. So if you want a question to be optional or required, that also exists in HTML forms. So that way it's pretty much you can make a very configurable form without using a bit of JavaScript. It's a very mature and universal technology. If I open Internet Explorer right now, forms will probably work better than some JavaScript stuff. Use pre-built criteria to determine validity of inputs. Th that last one was very important back when JavaScript did not exist because it meant that it's just going to be the browser's way of telling you if this is valid or not, instead of actually being able to use JavaScript. So before JavaScript, either the browser would have to compute, oh, is this a valid input or not, by using the preset values for the forms, or it would send it to the server, and the server, after receiving that request, would have to validate it and say, oh, is this an email? Do I need to send an error back? And that's very time consuming. And also, if you have a ton of users, that just puts a ton of unnecessary load on the servers, especially because some people will like type half of their email and then for some reason go to another text box and like type the other half, or uh like they're inputting, say, their credit card credentials and they forget some piece of information, so they need to go back and look at it. If all the authentication was done by the server, then that would place the server under a ton of load instead of being able to just say, this is the completed, verified, I know this works, and then I'll send it to the server. Some of the cons are it can't be used for custom validation. So for example, if I want to, if I want to input like a math equation, there's not really an option to make sure that that is an actual math equation because it's not really a standard way to define a math equation. And of course, it's not in any like HTTP specifications. And that was basically one of the reasons that JavaScript was made, so that you could make scripts that say, is this valid or is this not valid? Also, it requires the system to process any custom information instead of using client's devices. I talked about a bit about that previously. Okay, so to make a form, basically it's just the HTML form element. I highlighted a few things here. First one is going to be how the server will handle this request. So after add attributes for the form element, there's going to be action and method. So basically, action is just telling you where should I send this information after the user clicks submit or clicks, yeah, I want to send this to the server or whatever button that is. And the method is basically what HTTP method you're going to use to send that specific HTTP request so that the server will be able to say like use options or delete or any of the other HTTP methods we've talked about, except for get, because get is basically just type in some random website here is sending a get request, so it's too commonly used, and most people won't be using that for the method of a form. Now, inside the form, primarily, there are only going to be two types of elements, the label and the input. So the label is basically just the just a piece of text that goes before the input and tells you what you're supposed to put in there. And if you see here the two attributes I highlighted in green on the input, then there's a on there's a name attribute and it's right now set to a string with literally name inside. Uh, it can be set to like basically any string. So here we have name equals email. Basically, what this tells the browser is what is this label for? And it helps on some browsers because when you're clicking that label, it will usually direct you to the input corresponding to that label. And because you can sometimes have like labels above the input, you can sometimes have it like to the left of the input, or you're placing it in some kind of grid, the browser won't be able to determine which label goes to which input. So you're going to want to use the attribute for, and then set it to the exact same string as the name is set to. So here it's name and name, here's its email and email, and that just basically helps the browser determine what the label is for. Usually, if you're making a label, you're gonna want to end it with like say a colon or some instances you want like a comma or something, but just it makes it pretty obvious that that's where you're supposed to type something. And then finally, here's the input type equals submit. T so if you remember from a few lessons ago, we talked about the different types of input in HTML. Submit is one that's basically exclusive to forms. And what's going to do is it's just going to show up as a button instead of a text box or like a date selector or like a file upload button. It's just a button that will say submit. If you wanted to say something different, change the value of change the attribute value of the input to something else. Here it's just set to submit. So then when the user is filling these out and they're done with that, they're going to just see a submit button here and pressing it will take all that information and then put it in the body of a post request that they're going to send to the action URL. Last thing I haven't talked about here, required. So if you want it to be like a required question, you cannot submit the form without filling it out, then put required here. On different browsers, it's going to look very different what uh what validation looks like. So for example, here's the input type equals email. If I type in my phone number there, my browser will say invalid email. And if I don't put anything at all and I try to click submit, then there's this little box that pops up that says cannot be left blank. So that's how my browser specifically tells me that this is a required input. But if you're using, say, like an iPad or you're using another browser like Firefox, it will look different, but all modern browsers will have support for these features. Okay, so in order to handle those requests that come in from forms, this is basically just a slide I copied over from last lesson. You can use body parser to set it up, basically do app.use, so use it as a middleware. It comes it basically is coming between the request coming in and you're handling the request. So body parser.json, URL encoded, extended, true, basically just the two that you're going to want to use. And they tell body parser how to look at these requests and interpret them so that you can, in a post request handler, you can uh, use request.body.name or request.body.something else. So like here we have name and email. If I were to try and get the name, this is the name. If I were to try and get the email, it would be request.body.email. So basically, the name is also used by body parser to determine, oh, how will I access this? So here it's email. You're going to want to do request.body.email. But keep in mind, if you have not requested body parser and use the middleware with JSON and URL extended, it will not work because Express will be very confused as to what you're trying to access when body parser is not there to tell it this is the body of the request. So basically, the HTML form submission process starts when the user presses the submit button. It triggers the client's device to send an HTTP request, normally a post request, to a specified endpoint, which is specified with action, with the information of all the input fields in form element. So if you have an optional one, it will still send it over, but it will be blank. It sends an HTTP request, and the server responds with some kind of message, usually a success message or an error. And then what's interesting is that your device actually redirects to whatever the form's endpoint is. So say the endpoint is submit information. Then once I click that submit button and the server responds, then in this URL bar here, I'll see like website.com/ submit information. And then whatever the response is, it will replace basically what's on the screen. What's neat about that is that's basically a way where you can transmit information back to the user and you're basically viewing the result of a post request in your browser without using Mailman or uh, any tools to help you make the request. And forms basically just lets the client make a special kind of HTTP request to a server. However, if you were to reload that page, because there's no get handler, the browser is going to say there's no get handler for this endpoint. So I am going to try post again, but I have to use the previous form input to submit that post request. So then sometimes if you've seen that pop up, it just says submit previous form information. That's just basically what it's about. You've basically submitted a form on the last page, you've been redirected, but now you're reloading or trying to like go back with the back arrow. And it's saying I have to submit this form post request first before you can see the information. Something kind of neat that you can do with JavaScript and forms is to manipulate the forms to think that it's some kind of different request, especially by using fetch. This way you can use forms and custom validation schemes instead of just the pre-built ones. So basically, here's an example. I have the HTML here, just a simple name and email form with a submit button. In the JavaScript here, I'm getting that form using get element by ID. And uh, if if you remember from a while back about event listeners, there's an event called submit that happens every time that the form you click the submit button on the form. So basically, if I attach an event listener to this element, the entire form, and the form gets submitted, then this will run. Now if you remember from before, prevent default just prevents whatever is handling the request to just not be able to see the request. It's just going to be invisible to the browser's handling. So the browser doesn't actually know at this point that the form has been submitted. So it's not going to make that post request to the server. Now, after preventing the default, we can get the contents of the form and then use fetch in order to submit the form using a post request. So some advantages of this is that when you're clicking the submit button, the browser will think it's just a normal form. So if you type something other than email here, it's going to say, oh, that's not an email. Please type an actual email. And if there are a ton of other fields that are just form exclusive and they're pretty great for handling stuff like this. But for example, if you just want to stay on the same page, you don't want the form to redirect you to another page, and you don't want the whole page to reload when you submit a form, this would be a great way to do it because what it's essentially doing is the browser can't see that you submitted the form. So then the JavaScript is able to make the request using a fetch request and thus keep you on the same page. Okay, so something something else that you can do with inputs is file inputs. So file inputs can be used to make the user upload files. And basically they're kind of neat in that you can get the user to provide information that they would not have been able to type out or uh, expressed in like a checkbox or like a multiple select. So for example, images, if you want a specific image, then you can say input type equals file, and then there's an attribute called accept that's kind of exclusive to file inputs, and it basically tells the browser what kind of files am I looking for, and of course you still have the name, which is going to tell the backend uh what the how to reference this full input. So basically, the accept allows you to filter out the user's file system and say, I want this, I want A, I don't want B, I want C, I don't want D, and so on. And you can also filter it by its MIME type, which is basically a sort of sorting system for files. Uh, dot .png files will be image slash PNG. JPEG files will be image slash JPEG. And the neat thing with MIME files is that you can do something like image slash asterisk, which means any type of image file. So like icons, vector files, PNGs, any any sort of a file that has the MIME type image slash something will be able to be input here. Also, if you want to be able to input multiple files, so like the user can select like 5 files at once and upload them all, you can use multiple, and multiple is able just to tell the browser this input accepts multiple files, and there's a way to handle that using JavaScript. Okay, so in order to handle uploaded files, one really good way is to use something called Multer. Multer is another middleware like body parser, but instead of handling the body of post requests, it's able to handle files and actually do a bit more, but we're just going to focus on the files aspect. So to set up Multer, like body parser, you're gonna want to require it or npm install Multer and then require it. And so for Multer, you can store stuff in the file system. You can store stuff in the memory. So here, storage equals multer.storage memory storage. That just means we're temporarily holding on to the storage basically in the RAM, and we're going to delete it after uh, we're done running the whole program. The disadvantage of this is that if you only have like four gigabytes of RAM and you're uploading big file, then Mulcher is unable to accommodate that, and it might crash your computer or just fail the upload because Chrome thinks that your RAM can't handle it. Or you can do something like use file system, so FS with it, and store all the files in a folder. The advantage of this is that you can basically store as much information as you want, and it goes directly onto the hard disk. Usually you have way more storage on the hard disk, at least like 256 gigabytes if you're on a computer. So you don't need to worry about giant files. The disadvantage of that is that if you store it there, you're going to have a harder time retrieving it, and it's going to be a lot slower. So Okay, so handling the request. If I have a form pointed at slash upload and it's uploading a file, instead of jumping directly into the handler, I'm going to put upload.single file here, uh, which is going to use Mulcher to handle the just one file that's being uploaded. That's basically just including middleware on that one endpoint, that one handler. And Express is going to be using upload.single to process the incoming HTTP request first before then giving it to my handler here, which basically now I can use request.file in order to access that one file. Uh, and then if the file is received, I can say file received and then request.file. If I want to show the file back to the user, I can use the file buffer, so request.file.buffer to show the user basically what their file looks like, or like essentially a preview of what was uploaded. Anyways, I have an example of this set up. Anyway, so this is the RichCode.js static repository, but instead of the normal server, I modified it to support some of the projects we're doing today. And some of those projects, you're going to be both making the HTML and the backend JS and handling how they work together. So that's going to be important when you're building web servers. Anyways, if I start this and open this up, uh, project two, yes. Okay, so here's an email. If I type in hello here and I try and click submit email, it's going to say please, and if you can see that, it's telling me please include an at in the email address. Hello is missing an at. So if I type in like 556 at gmail.com, click submit, it's able to submit, and this is what's being put back to me. So anyways, this is the file upload one. If I'm uploading something, so uh let's see, I just have this random file. I'm gonna click upload file, that's the submit button. And anyways, in here, what it's doing, we're in project two right now. It's going to the endpoint commit file. So in server.js submit file, how it's handling this is as we said before, it's using the upload.single as middleware in order to handle the file first before sending it to the handler. If there's no file, then it's going to send back an error. But if there is a file, then it's going to show me the file name and its path. And this one is configured so that everything is going to be put into the folder uploads that's stored on the hard disk. So it's just showing me where that I can find that information in the future. And notice how in the post request, when I'm sending stuff back, if I click submit again, it's redirecting me to submit email, and it's giving me basically the HTML here. If I try if I try and reload by clicking and hitting enter, it's going to be saying cannot get slash submit email because there's no get handler. And by doing that, I'm basically just saying I want to make a GET request to it. If I click reload, there's a pop-up here that says confirmation form resubmission. And if I click continue, it's going to submit the form again. So just keep in mind when you see that pop up in any website, or if you're making some application that uses forms, keep in mind that that will happen with the user. And usually you're going to want to, so like say the user, something's wrong with this page and the user wants to reload, they click this and hit enter. It says it gives them another error. So you're probably going to want to resolve that some way, either by putting like a 404 page there or redirecting them back to the previous page. So anyways, here's the handler where uh it creates the upload directory and let me okay, yeah. So here's the storage options where I use multi-disk storage instead of memory storage, and I'm just specifying the destination. So here I can he- I'm using .uploads in FS to create the uploads, and here I'm using that folder in order to store all the files in, and just to create a unique file name because upload when you're uploading some of the files, it will give you a really wacky file name. So then it's able just to make a unique file name that doesn't really interfere with the other files in there. So if you have uploaded the same file 3 times and it's given me 3 different numbers that are names for that file, even though they're the exact same file, in order to prevent conflict. Okay, so next there is semantics, but I'm going to show you some stuff on here first. So password, if you do input type equals password, and if my computer will stop lagging, um, that's two. Okay, two. So if I have a password and I want to submit it, you often see like if I type in anything, it's going to show at these little dots so that you cannot see my password. I cannot see my password. That way it's secure and nobody looking over your shoulder or recording your screen can see your password when you're typing it in. Your, if the input type is password, that is always going to be the case. But notice if I go here and go there, change the type to text, hit enter. Now if I type in here, all the text is going to be visible. If I go back and change it to a password, it's going to go into that again, so on. Basically, how this is useful when I'm signing into a Google account. So like that's another account. Um okay. So basically when you're logging into something, if you know about the little view and like hide button for your password that you can use to like make sure that you've typed your password correctly, that is basically changing the type of the input from password to text to back to password back to text. And you're able to use that to give to give the user both security and accessibility in case like they're not sure what they typed. Something else, with radio buttons in the form, each each radio button. So this is just a like multi-select test type radio buttons. Each of these is going to be an input, and the type is radio. You're basically acting like these are three different text boxes, which technically they're not, but it's just each radio is going to represent this little round circle here that you can click on. And notice if I click on the labels, like red, blue, and green, the radios will also select, even though I'm not clicking the radios themselves. That is because of these four labels. Without those four labels, if I were to click here, green would not be selected, and it would just be the radios themselves, which is kind of inaccessible. And if I submit this, uh, it's able to tell that the color is green. So, anyways, the value of the the value tells the browser what to send back if this input is selected, and the name. Yes, you can have multiple inputs with one name, but that's just for checkboxes and radios. It tells the it tells the again the backend how to access this specific input or this section of inputs in this case. And here notice instead of an input, you can also use the button type equals submit inside the form, and that also works as a normal button. So basically, the point of this is that one, you can have multiple inputs that have the same name and different values that the browser will be able to interpret differently and send back to the backend as a single input instead of tier three. And the labels, you do need the four, and this is why. Same thing for checkboxes. You can check all three of them. You can check one of them. These are kind of independent of each other, but if I check two of them and submit, it's reading it as a single input where there are two basically things that are being inputted. And also for radio, the fact that they all have the same name tells the form that if I click on red, green will de automatically deselect. If I click on blue, red will automatically deselect. You don't have to do that with JavaScript because uh, if you set all the names of all three the same, then they inherently know uh, no two or three of them can be ever selected at one time. And also there's just the generic text area form where it's a piece of text where you can type in something, submit it, and we'll be able to read it. Here, instead of using an input, you can use a text area. Uh, it, that will be able to give the user a larger place to type instead of just like a little text box. And neat thing with text areas, they have this thing in the corner where you can resize them yourself. So if you're typing something that's really long, you can resize this so that it's kind of long. You type it out and you click submit and you can see the whole message. And it handles it the same way as a regular input in that it has a name and the backend is able to use that name to determine what the input is. Okay, so uh we're going to give semantics. We're gonna do that next class. Basically, this is the one that's left over from lesson 10, where it's just a bunch of normal HTTP request projects, and this is the one from this class where it's going to be using more forms and Mulcher. So we're going to start out with number one. We have around 12 minutes left, so we're probably gonna do like 6 minutes on this one and 6 minutes on the other one. Remember, if you don't get these done, you can always do them after class, or uh maybe I'll give some time next class. So that's it. You can start working on these. You have 6 minutes. Okay, that is about time for test it out number two. Oh, sorry, number one. Here is number two. And we have around 5 minutes left of class. Okay, so that is about class today. We'll do a bit more of this next lesson, and we'll go into semantics. So you're all free to go. Bye.